Good evening, and welcome to Detective Notebook. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight, here in the quiet charm of St. Mary Mead. The fire crackles softly, lanterns glow through the mist, and the gentle autumn breeze carries the scent of falling leaves. Wherever you are listening from tonight, I hope you're settled in with a warm cup of tea, ready to step into a story full of mystery, curiosity, and gentle suspense. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Share it in the comments below, and if you enjoy cozy mysteries that warm the heart while tickling your curiosity, don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 1. Pumpkins and Parlour Games. The drawing room of Maple Manor was alive with a soft, golden glow, the kind that only flickering candlelight and a low autumn sun can provide. Orange pumpkins, plump and round, were arranged along the mantel in neat clusters, each bearing a carved smile or a delicate swirl of ivy. The faint hum of the gramophone filled the space with a cheerful waltz, its scratchy notes mingling with the gentle clink of teacups and the subdued chatter of the guests. Miss Marple, as ever, moved quietly among them, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, with a calm patience that often went unnoticed. Mrs. Bantry, perched on the edge of a wing-back chair, leaned forward conspiratorially toward the vicar and whispered a string of observations about the new gardener. "I don't trust him," she murmured, her voice tinged with both curiosity and suspicion. "Came from London, you know. Never seen a man who looks so ordinary yet carries himself as if he knows everyone's business." Miss Marple sipped her tea, nodding politely, yet every word Mrs. Bantry uttered became a small clue in the quiet puzzle she was assembling. Across the room, Colonel Melchett chuckled over a remark about strangers who wandered too close to the manor gates. "Strangers at doors," he said, raising his cup, "are always trouble. One never knows what they might be seeking." The men around him nodded in agreement, their expressions serious but softened by the festive surroundings. It was the kind of statement that would cause most people to glance around, measuring faces for signs of recognition, and Miss Marple noticed exactly that. A quick exchange of nervous glances here, a slight stiffening of posture there, small gestures that would escape most eyes but never hers. Near the hearth, Mrs. Whitby kept her hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting occasionally toward the window as though expecting some unexpected guest to appear on the foggy path outside. The maid, who moved with careful precision, avoided her mistress's gaze entirely, carrying a silver tray of biscuits, as if every movement might betray something she wished to conceal. Miss Marple observed them both silently, her mind cataloguing each twitch and hesitation. People reveal the most, she thought, when they believe they are merely being polite. The warmth of the tea mingled with the scent of burning wood, creating a comfort that encouraged openness. Guests leaned toward one another, laughing quietly at shared jokes or commenting on the beauty of the autumn leaves drifting past the wide windows. Yet beneath this easy conviviality, Miss Marple sensed the undercurrent of tension that always accompanies a gathering in which everyone carries a small secret. Even in a village as seemingly peaceful as St. Mary Mead, some stories preferred the quiet corners to the centre of the room. As she reached for a delicate biscuit, Miss Marple's gaze briefly settled on a man seated near the edge of the room. He smiled politely at everyone but said little, and his hands, resting on the arm of his chair, were almost too still. It was the kind of restraint that suggested he was measuring the room, cataloguing behaviours, and perhaps hiding more than most. Miss Marple made a mental note, not for accusation, but for understanding. Each person's demeanour was a small thread in a tapestry she intended to unravel quietly, without disturbance, before the evening's true events made themselves known. By the time the clock chimed, signalling the half-hour past 3, the room hummed with a pleasant energy. Conversations floated in polite arcs from tea tables to the hearth, punctuated by laughter or the gentle sigh of someone settling back into a chair. And yet, Miss Marple remained alert, her senses tuned not to the music or the tea, but to the subtle signs that would, she knew, point toward the heart of the night's mystery. In the drawing-room of Maple Manor, nothing was ever quite as ordinary as it seemed. The hour had arrived for the masked portion of the evening, and the atmosphere in Maple Manor shifted with a subtle thrill. Guests emerged from the drawing-room donning an assortment of masks, delicate lace for the ladies, painted Venetian patterns for the gentlemen, and a few whimsical animal faces that made even the most reserved smile. The flickering candlelight reflected on the gilded mirrors, multiplying faces and disguises until the room seemed a playful forest of shadows. Miss Marple, with her own modest black lace mask, observed quietly, aware that in a room of hidden faces, the smallest movement could reveal far more than the boldest declarations. The gramophone played a soft, lilting waltz, and the polished floorboards echoed with the rhythmic steps of dancers. Pairs moved with varying grace, some slipping and sliding in comedic enthusiasm, others gliding with practiced poise. It was a scene of merriment, yet Miss Marple's eyes caught the subtleties beneath the laughter. Near the library door, a man in a black domino mask lingered, shifting from foot to foot, as if unsure where to go or what to do. His hands trembled slightly when he adjusted his mask, and he stole glances toward Mrs. Whitby as though searching for permission to be elsewhere. Miss Marple noted every hesitation. The house had a rhythm to it, she thought, and anyone unfamiliar with its cadence would appear awkward, out of place. Most guests adjusted easily, slipping into the waltz as though the manor itself welcomed them. Yet this stranger seemed to measure each step, each glance, each polite nod with careful deliberation. She sipped her tea and watched as he edged closer to the mantel, keeping to the periphery while others twirled past, and then a small gasp, followed by a sudden silence in one corner. Mrs. Whitby's jewelled brooch, a family heirloom pinned elegantly at her shoulder, had vanished. At first, some guests chuckled nervously, assuming it a playful trick meant to tease the hostess. But as Mrs. Whitby's expression tightened, laughter faltered into uneasy murmurs. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as the room's energy shifted, a tension threading through the music like a quiet undertone. Miss Marple, ever perceptive, felt the change immediately. The brooch was not missing by accident, nor was it likely a prank. The tension in the stranger's stance, the careful avoidance of other guests' eyes, all of it spoke of more than mere mischief. The trouble with masks, Miss Marple mused quietly to herself, is that sometimes they don't come off. She watched the domino-masked man as he lingered near the library, his gaze flicking nervously toward the hearth, then toward the door. Each movement was measured, deliberate, yet betrayed the slightest tremor of anxiety. Miss Marple did not move to confront him. Instead, she allowed the scene to unfold, gathering information in the gentle manner that had so often revealed the truth some others failed to see. The other villagers continued their waltz, but a few cautious eyes now darted toward the library door. Curiosity piqued, suspicion sparked. Whispers floated like autumn leaves across the polished floor. Did anyone see that? Perhaps it was misplaced. I do hope it's nothing serious. Yet Miss Marple understood that in moments like these, subtle observations mattered far more than frantic accusations. A gloved hand brushing too frequently across the waistcoat, a slight hesitation before answering a question, a borrowed glance that lingered. These were the silent confessions that spoke louder than words. By the time the music tapered, leaving only the faint hum of conversation and the crackling hearth, the masked man had vanished into the shadow of the corridor, leaving the brooch's disappearance as the quiet centerpiece of the room. The evening's revelry continued, but with a touch more caution, and Miss Marple, sipping her tea, considered carefully the connections between faces, masks and secrets yet to be revealed. In the dance of shadows and laughter, she knew that some mysteries like masks were not so easily removed. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Brooch. The waltz had ended, leaving the manor in a gentle hush, punctuated only by the soft murmurs of guests settling into chairs near the fire. Miss Marple rose quietly from her own seat, carrying a cup of cider that steamed in the cool October air. She moved from cluster to cluster of villagers, engaging in casual conversation with a warmth that invited openness, yet concealed her keen scrutiny. Every word she spoke was gentle, every smile unassuming, yet her eyes were alert, noting each subtle shift in posture, each glance that lingered too long or too briefly. "Did you enjoy the dancing?" she asked Mrs. Bantry, who clutched her cup as if it were a shield. "Ah, delightfully so," Mrs. Bantry replied, but the faint tension around her eyes betrayed something more. She continued, lowering her voice, "I assure you the brooch is not stolen, simply misplaced, perhaps by someone unaware of its value." Miss Marple nodded politely, filing the information away. People's insistence on innocence often hid as much as their confessions. The vicar, seated near the fireplace, cleared his throat. "I did notice, Miss Marple," he began carefully, "a shadow passing the window earlier. It was brief, almost fleeting, but enough to catch my attention. A tall figure, I should say, gliding past as if avoiding the light." Miss Marple tilted her head slightly, savouring the description. Every clue, like every person, must be looked at twice. Nothing was irrelevant. Even a passing shadow could reveal intentions or concealments. Other villagers offered their own accounts. The gardener, the colonel, and a few of the younger ladies, each reiterating they had been elsewhere, observing or participating in the festivities. Alibis were plentiful, but Miss Marple noted with quiet amusement that too many people seemed to know details they ought not have. A whispered correction here, a hesitant glance there. Each detail a fragment of a puzzle that demanded patience more than accusation. Her attention drifted toward the side door, where the floorboards bore subtle impressions in the freshly fallen mud. Footprints, half hidden by the polished carpet, led from the garden to the threshold, some larger than others, as if several had traversed the path unnoticed. A faint scent lingered in the air, earthy and oddly familiar, pipe smoke, aromatic and lingering. Miss Marple inhaled delicately, letting the scent and the footprints settle in her mind like pieces of a map. The presence of such traces, she thought, implied more than an innocent stroll. Someone had been at the side entrance. Whether to retrieve, hide, or observe remained unclear. She returned to the hearth, moving among the group with gentle questions that encouraged disclosure without pressure. "Did anyone notice anything unusual in the garden earlier?" she asked, her tone light, conversational, as though she were merely curious about the landscaping. A few murmured denials, but the same shadowed glances and careful hesitations danced across the room. In those small motions, a hand brushing against a sleeve, a cough to mask nervousness, Miss Marple read intentions and reactions with the precision of a seasoned observer. By the time the cider cups were emptied and conversations lulled into reflective pauses, Miss Marple had quietly catalogued more than a dozen subtle clues, the statements of innocence, the hesitant glances, the muddy footprints, the pipe smoke, and the fleeting shadow described by the vicar. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in her chest, and allowed a small, thoughtful smile. In the cosy comfort of the manor, amid laughter and the fading notes of music, the pieces were beginning to form a pattern, one that would reveal much more than anyone yet realized. Even in the calm, the room hummed with quiet tension, a mystery poised delicately between the cheerful chatter and the hearth's gentle glow. Miss Marple, sitting back in her chair, reflected that tonight, as with all gatherings, nothing was ever quite as simple as it seemed. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy curtains of Maple Manor, casting pale gold across the polished floorboards. Outside, the garden was still damp with dew, and the crisp scent of autumn leaves drifted faintly through the open windows. The manor itself, so vibrant with laughter and music the night before, now felt hushed, as though it were holding its breath in anticipation of whatever revelations the new day might bring. It was the kind of quiet that invited attention, where even the smallest movement could carry a secret. The maid, a young girl with careful manners and quick eyes, was the first to disturb this morning calm. She carried a small, hollowed pumpkin, one of many left from the previous night's festivities. As she dusted it gently with her handkerchief, her fingers brushed against something inside, and she froze. Pulling it free, she revealed a neatly folded piece of paper, its edges crisp and deliberate. Unfolding it, she read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "The truth lies buried where the ivy grows." The words were simple, yet their weight seemed to fill the room. The handwriting was firm, masculine, unfamiliar, precise in a way that spoke of deliberation rather than carelessness. Miss Marple, already observing from the doorway, stepped forward quietly. She took the note in her gloved hands, examining the slanted letters with a practiced eye. The curve of the T, the sharpness of the G, every stroke carried a confidence that contrasted sharply with the hesitancy in Mrs. Whitby's expression. At the sight of the note, Mrs. Whitby, standing by the mantel, gasped and sank into the nearest chair, her face pale. A faint moan escaped her lips, and she covered her eyes, as if the note itself had physically struck her. Villagers, summoned by the sudden commotion, whispered nervously among themselves. "Ghosts, perhaps," someone murmured, and a ripple of uneasy chuckles passed through the small assembly. Others speculated about mischief, hidden messages, and long-forgotten pranks. Miss Marple, however, remained entirely composed. She placed a calming hand on the maid's shoulder and addressed Mrs. Whitby with gentle firmness. "Ghosts don't write notes." "Or do they?" she said softly, her words carrying both humour and reassurance. The slight lift of her lips, subtle and knowing, eased some of the tension while keeping the villagers alert. Indeed, she reflected, the living were far more capable of mischief, fear, and concealment than any apparition could ever hope to be. Moving toward the window, Miss Marple allowed herself a quiet glance at the ivy climbing the manor's walls. The garden, still slick with morning dew, seemed ordinary enough, but she knew from experience that ordinary places often concealed extraordinary secrets. Each creeping tendril, each shadow beneath the thick green leaves, could hold evidence of clandestine meetings, hidden objects, or messages left for eyes daring enough to discover them. The villagers, still murmuring nervously, leaned in closer, curiosity outweighing their lingering fear. They whispered of stories heard long ago, of secret passages and vanished treasures, yet Miss Marple's mind moved through each theory with serene clarity. The handwriting, the choice of pumpkin, the message itself, all were deliberate acts meant to provoke attention and perhaps unease. She catalogued every small detail quietly, forming a web of possibilities that stretched through the manor like the ivy itself. Mrs. Whitby, slowly regaining composure, looked toward Miss Marple with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Miss Marple handed the note back, her eyes twinkling faintly. "The living," she said, "have far more imagination than the dead, and far more at stake." The villagers nodded, some relieved, others intrigued, but all aware that tonight's mysteries were only beginning to unfold. The pumpkin lay empty now, yet the message it carried seemed to linger in the air, a gentle reminder that curiosity, once sparked, refused to die quietly. Chapter 3. The Garden Path. The morning was still young, the sky pale with the faintest hint of dawn, when Miss Marple stepped into the garden. The air was crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of wet leaves and dew, and the soft glow of early light lent the ivy-clad walls an almost magical hue. Footsteps from the previous night marred the soft grass, subtle depressions that the casual eye might overlook, but to Miss Marple they spoke volumes. She followed them carefully, her sensible shoes leaving only the faintest trace beside those that had already passed. Each step a quiet act of observation. The footprints led toward the ivy-covered wall at the far end of the garden, where the morning mist clung to the creeping green leaves like a thin veil. Miss Marple crouched, studying the impressions in the soft earth. Some were larger, heavy with purpose, while others were lighter, perhaps hesitant. A careful eye, she thought, could read intention as clearly as direction, and in the subtle inconsistencies she found her first threads of understanding. Near the old sundial, she noticed a small pile of ash, dark against the damp grass. It smelled faintly of tobacco, sharp yet familiar, and a small curl of paper ash suggested a cigarette had been stubbed out only hours ago. She lifted it gently with her fingers, examining the tiny remnants. The brand was rare. London made, sold only in certain shops, a fact that would escape most observers entirely. Miss Marple tucked the evidence into her pocket, noting silently that someone in Maple Manor had habits unfamiliar to the village. At that moment the gardener appeared, his coat damp from the morning dew. "Miss Marple," he said cheerfully, "I see you're wandering in the garden again. Nothing out of the ordinary here, I assure you. No one's been by the wall, and certainly no strangers." His hands were clean, his expression casual, yet Miss Marple caught the slight pause before his assurance, the faint tightening around his eyes. She smiled politely, a small, knowing curve of the lips. "Oh, I'm sure, Mr. Hobson," she replied, her tone light, almost teasing. "But sometimes the smallest lies grow the tallest ivy, do they not?" She allowed the words to hang for a moment, letting them settle between them like dew on the leaves. The gardener flushed slightly, glancing at the sundial and then away toward the manor. Miss Marple said nothing further, but her mind quietly catalogued the information. The garden itself was serene, the low mist curling around the flower beds and hedges. Yet beneath that calm surface, the traces of human activity hinted at secrets. A mislaid footprint here, the faint scent of tobacco there. All spoke of someone moving with intention, someone determined to leave little but hints for the perceptive observer. Miss Marple knelt again, tracing the edges of the footprints and noting their spacing, their depth, the direction of the pressure. Every small detail was a story in itself, a narrative that the careless eye would dismiss, but that the careful mind would read like a letter from an old friend. She straightened, brushing damp grass from her skirt, and allowed herself a small, satisfied sigh. The morning was young, the manor still quiet, yet the garden had already revealed more than most would discover in a week. The footprints, the ash, the half-truths from the gardener, all were threads, delicate but strong, waiting to be woven into the tapestry of the day's events. Miss Marple glanced once more at the ivy-covered wall, sensing that the answer, when it came, would be hidden there, or at least close enough for those who knew where to look, even in the gentle calm of dawn. The garden whispered of secrets, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, was ready to listen. The morning air was filled with the gentle tolling of church bells, their deep, resonant notes drifting across the village like a steady heartbeat. Miss Marple, walking quietly along the garden path, allowed the sound to settle around her before turning her attention to the edge of the property. Near the old wrought-iron gate, two villagers huddled together, speaking in voices so low that their words might have been mistaken for the rustle of autumn leaves. She slowed her pace, curious, though careful, to remain unseen. "I told you," one whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "He shouldn't have come back. Not after all these years. No good can come of it." The other nodded, lowering a hand to reveal a small, weathered photograph. The image was faded at the edges, the ink slightly blotched, yet the faces were clear. A younger Mrs. Whitby smiled beside a man whose features were strikingly familiar. The same stranger Miss Marple had noticed at the masked waltz. His eyes, even in the photograph, carried a certain sharpness, a quiet intelligence, and the hint of mischief. Miss Marple approached silently, her fingers brushing the edge of a pumpkin patch as she neared the gate. She watched the villagers exchange the photograph, their murmured words almost trembling with urgency. One man carefully folded it again, as though the picture itself might carry secrets that should not escape. Yet Miss Marple knew that the photograph was not the danger but the reaction it elicited. Sometimes the past comes dressed for the party, she thought, and here it was, arriving unexpectedly and with consequences that few could yet comprehend. When the villagers moved away, distracted by the distant sound of a cart on the lane, Miss Marple retrieved the photograph quietly, holding it delicately in her hand. She studied it carefully, noting the subtle similarities between the younger man and the stranger at the manor. Every detail, from the tilt of the head to the curve of the smile, aligned too neatly to dismiss as coincidence. There was history here, a story that had begun long before the villagers' cheerful celebrations, a secret buried beneath years of polite smiles and quiet evenings. Returning to the manor, Miss Marple carried the photograph as though it were a fragile clue, something to be examined with patience rather than urgency. She found Mrs. Whitby in the sitting room, arranging her morning tea with trembling hands. When Miss Marple held out the photograph, Mrs. Whitby's eyes widened, not with recognition, but with fear. Her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered above the image, as if touching it might summon long-buried consequences. Miss Marple observed quietly, allowing the pause to stretch without comment. There was no acknowledgement of familiarity, no gasp of recognition, only a shadow of apprehension that spoke volumes. History, she thought, can be a gentle companion, or it can arrive unannounced to rattle the foundations of even the calmest households. Mrs. Whitby's reaction was subtle but precise. It revealed more than words ever could. The room was silent, except for the faint clink of a teaspoon against the saucer, a small reminder of normalcy amidst the brewing tension. Miss Marple replaced the photograph gently on the table, her eyes meeting Mrs. Whitby's briefly. The unspoken understanding between them was clear. The past had arrived, dressed in shadows and photographs, and it was only a matter of time before its presence demanded attention. Outside, the wind stirred the ivy along the manor walls, lifting a few golden leaves into the air. The garden path remained quiet, save for the soft shuffle of early risers, yet Miss Marple's mind traced the events as though they were footprints in the dew. The stranger from the previous night, the photograph, and Mrs. Whitby's fear, all were threads in a tapestry that would soon unravel. She sipped her tea, calm yet alert, knowing that the garden and the gate had revealed only a fraction of the story. There was more to be discovered quietly, patiently, and with careful observation. Chapter 4. Secrets of Maple Manor. The afternoon sun filtered through tall library windows, casting long golden beams across rows of polished shelves and neatly stacked volumes. Miss Marple moved quietly among the stacks, helping the maid straighten papers and dust the corners of the room. The manor, usually so orderly, held an undercurrent of tension now, the echoes of last night's waltz and the morning's revelations lingering like faint perfume. As she reached for a stack of old pamphlets, her eye caught a small, brass keyhole embedded in a cabinet at the far side of the room, one she had never noticed before. The cabinet was modest in size, dark oak with intricate carvings along the edges, and the lock glinted faintly in the sunlight. Miss Marple's fingers hovered over it, her mind already alert to the possibilities. A locked drawer is an invitation to any true detective, she thought, and a small thrill of curiosity sparked in her chest. She glanced at the maid who stood nearby, dusting a shelf with careful attention. "I wonder what might be inside," Miss Marple said lightly, as though commenting on the weather. Mrs. Whitby, who had been arranging a set of letters on the desk, turned sharply at the mention of the cabinet. "Oh, that," she said, a slight edge to her voice.
"That belonged to my late husband. Old letters, nothing more."
They'd been there for decades, untouched. Her eyes flicked toward the keyhole with just the faintest hint of hesitation. Miss Marple noted it carefully. Her curiosity piqued. Decades untouched, she mused silently. Yet there was something about Mrs. Whitby's expression that suggested the cabinet had not been entirely abandoned. With polite inquiry, Miss Marple opened the small drawer above the lock, finding only a few trivial papers. Invoices, old bookmarks, nothing significant. Her fingers then traced the edges of the lock itself, noting the wear and the faint scratches that suggested repeated use. Someone had been in here deliberately and not just to glance at old letters. The dates on the letters in the drawer, carefully catalogued, did not align with Mrs. Whitby's recollections. Some were from 20 years past, yet a few were more recent, written in the same delicate hand, but on paper of a different, newer quality. Miss Marple's mind worked quietly, cataloguing the contradictions. Why claim they were untouched for decades when evidence suggested otherwise? It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone unobservant, yet to her it spoke volumes. Someone had been using the manor to hide more than memories, perhaps secrets, or perhaps items best left unseen by casual eyes. The room, filled with the smell of polished wood and old parchment, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the quiet investigation to unfold further. She closed the cabinet carefully and stepped back, brushing imaginary dust from her hands. The maid watched, curious but unknowing, while Mrs. Whitby busied herself with arranging the letters again, her fingers trembling slightly as she straightened a stack. Miss Marple, however, remained calm, letting the small observations sink in. The lock, the inconsistent dates, the subtle signs of recent use, all were threads she would follow gently, without confrontation, in the manner she had perfected over many years. The rest of the room seemed ordinary. The stacks of books, the soft rug beneath her feet, the faint tick of the mantel clock. Yet, in the locked drawer, in the silence of the library, the seeds of the manor's deeper mysteries had been quietly revealed. Miss Marple moved to the window, gazing out at the ivy climbing the walls and the neatly raked paths below. Somewhere beneath that calm exterior, the manor held more than furniture and letters. It harboured stories, carefully concealed and waiting for the right observer to uncover them. In that quiet moment, Miss Marple's mind traced possibilities, linking footprints, letters, and cautious glances from the night before. She knew that the locked cabinet was not merely a piece of furniture, but a key, figuratively and almost literally, to understanding the secrets of Maple Manor. As Miss Marple continued her quiet exploration of the library, a small envelope, misplaced among the neatly stacked letters on a side table, caught her attention. It was yellowed with age, edges slightly frayed, and the paper bore the faint imprint of handwriting that had been long ignored. Curious, she carefully slid a finger under the flap and extracted the single sheet within. The ink had faded to a warm brown, yet the words were still clear. Each looped letter, written with a care that suggested urgency and intimacy. Opening it delicately, she began to read aloud, her voice low enough to carry only within the room. "My dear Eleanor, I cannot keep the secret any longer." She paused, letting the words sink into the air. The phrasing was gentle, almost pleading, yet carried a weight that demanded attention. She continued, noting the meticulous structure of the sentences and the deliberate pauses in punctuation. Miss Marple's mind worked swiftly, linking the tone, the handwriting, and the context with the shadows of the manor's past. A sudden gasp interrupted the quiet. Mrs. Bantry, who had been dusting a nearby shelf, froze with her hand poised mid-air. "That handwriting," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet charged with disbelief.
It belongs to him. I cannot believe it, and after all these years.
"But I recognize it immediately." Her eyes widened as she stared at the letter in Miss Marple's hand. The words, the penmanship, the careful construction, all were unmistakably those of a man long declared dead, someone the village had thought gone forever. Miss Marple's expression remained composed, her tone calm as she continued. "I cannot keep the secret any longer. I fear that time has not been kind to my conscience nor my courage. You must forgive me, for it has been longer than I intended." She stopped, letting the pauses in the letter emphasize the weight of the message. The missing signature seemed deliberate, as though the writer intended the words to stand alone, their power amplified by absence. The room was silent except for the faint tick of the mantel clock, each second echoing the gravity of the discovery. Villagers gathered discreetly at the edges of the library, whispers hushed and filled with anticipation. Miss Marple folded the letter gently, turning it over in her hands. The envelope, its frayed edges and faded script, suggested secrecy kept for decades, now revealed at last. The dead, it seemed, were excellent correspondents, their messages travelling unseen, leaving traces that the living could only uncover with patience and care. Mrs. Bantry, still pale, stepped closer to Miss Marple. "I never thought I would see his handwriting again," she said softly. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached out, brushing the edge of the envelope without touching the paper itself.
It cannot be possible.
How could anyone have kept this hidden for so long? Her question hung in the room, not needing an answer, for Miss Marple already had her thoughts. Someone in Maple Manor had preserved this letter intentionally, allowing it to surface only when the time was right, perhaps hoping that its revelation would guide certain actions or memories. Miss Marple carefully set the letter aside, allowing herself a small, knowing smile. The threads of the past, interwoven with the present, were beginning to show patterns that others had not yet perceived. Each word, each omission, each carefully chosen pause revealed a life, a secret, a motive that reached from decades ago into the manor's present day. The mystery was no longer confined to the night of the masked waltz or the vanished brooch. It extended into the very history of Maple Manor itself. As the villagers whispered among themselves, Miss Marple traced her finger lightly over the envelope, noting the faint creases, the imprint of handwriting beneath the faded ink. The past, she thought, always had a way of resurfacing, sometimes gently, sometimes with a shock. And tonight it had arrived in the quiet intimacy of a single, unsigned letter. Chapter 5. The Midnight Visitor. The manor had settled into a quiet that was both comforting and slightly unnerving. The hush of late evening broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards and the distant hoot of an owl. Miss Marple, tucked under a warm quilt in her guest room, had almost drifted into sleep when a faint, rhythmic tapping reached her ears. Footsteps, deliberate but hesitant, echoed softly along the corridor outside. She lay still for a moment, listening, letting the sound repeat itself with the patience of someone accustomed to subtle clues. With a steady hand, she retrieved a small candle from the bedside table, the flame casting a golden glow that wavered with her cautious movements. Pulling on her robe over the nightgown, she rose silently and opened the door a crack, peering into the dimly lit corridor. The carpet muffled her steps as she followed the faint sound, her sharp eyes adjusting quickly to the shadows. Whoever it was moved with purpose, yet there was a careful hesitation in their stride, a measured search rather than a frantic escape. Near the study door she paused. A shadow shifted against the polished wood, vanishing instantly when she stepped closer. The faint smell of cologne lingered in the air, subtle but unmistakable. A rich, woody scent that suggested the visitor had taken care in appearance, yet their intentions were clearly secretive. On the floor lay a single glove, delicate in texture, its mate nowhere to be found. Miss Marple bent to retrieve it, noting the size and cut, storing it mentally for later deduction. The pattern of movement was peculiar. The footsteps had traced a careful path through the corridor, pausing at each doorway before moving on.
Nothing had been taken, nothing destroyed.
The visitor's interest seemed confined to observation, to discovery rather than theft. Miss Marple, lighting the candle higher, considered the implications. Those who seek the truth, she reflected, often trip over it, unaware that their presence leaves clues for the quiet observer. She traced the corridor once more, stepping lightly, noting the subtle impressions left in the soft rug. A slight drag of a heel here, a brief pause there. The visitor had lingered in areas where important letters and documents were kept, yet nothing had been disturbed. Each mark, each lingering scent of cologne was a whisper of intention. The visitor's focus was precise, revealing a mind intent on uncovering information rather than causing alarm. As she returned to the study door, Miss Marple allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The night, while silent and still, had revealed a pattern that daylight alone could not uncover. Someone had moved deliberately through Maple Manor, guided by curiosity, concern, or perhaps a secret urgency. The footprints, the glove, the subtle aroma of cologne, each was a breadcrumb along a path of careful observation, waiting to be followed with patience. By the time she returned to her room, the corridor lay quiet once again. The manor seemed to exhale, as though content to let the mystery breathe in the shadows for a little longer. Miss Marple placed the glove carefully on the bedside table, next to the flickering candle, and settled once more under the quilt. She did not fear the visitor. She knew that every step, every mark, every subtle sign was part of the story waiting to be unravelled. Outside, the night deepened, the moon casting silver light across the ivy-clad walls. Inside, the quiet hum of anticipation settled over Maple Manor. Footsteps had been heard, shadows observed, and a secret left behind, all of which promised revelations that would come in their own time. Miss Marple, calm and observant, let herself drift into the gentle rhythm of the house, confident that the visitors' intentions, like the clues left in their wake, would soon speak for themselves. Later that evening, the manor had quieted into a gentle, expectant hush. The candles in the hall flickered against the polished banisters, casting long shadows that seemed to sway with the rhythm of the house itself. Miss Marple, moving deliberately and softly, sought the gardener, Mr. Hobson, who had been unusually alert and restless all day. She found him near the tool shed at the back of the property, fingering a trowel with distracted care, his eyes flicking toward the manor windows as if expecting judgment or reprisal. "Mr. Hobson," she said softly, her tone warm and unassuming, "might I have a word?" The gardener straightened immediately, his expression a mixture of apprehension and relief. He nodded and stepped closer, lowering his voice. The night was forgiving, quiet enough that only the rustle of leaves accompanied their conversation. Miss Marple's presence was gentle, yet commanding in its quiet authority, the kind that invited honesty without fear of reproach. He hesitated, then began, his voice hushed and careful.
I saw something a few days ago, Miss Marple."
I wasn't sure what to do, or even if I should say anything. It concerned the stranger, the man who appeared at the masked dance. Miss Marple nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I saw him meeting Mrs. Whitby near the garden gate. They were speaking in whispers."
"I didn't approach. I didn't want to be seen. I feared that if anyone knew I had seen, I might lose my position."
"You understand? I've been here long enough to know how quickly rumours can travel." Miss Marple listened with quiet patience, letting him unfold his confession at his own pace. Every detail he offered, the time of day, the careful avoidance of light, the manner in which the pair leaned close together, gave shape to the vague suspicions she had gathered from footprints, shadows, and whispered conversations. Nothing he revealed was dramatic, yet the significance of a simple secret meeting often outweighed the spectacle of any overt crime. "I see," she said finally, her tone calm and kind. "Thank you for telling me, Mr. Hobson. Sometimes it takes great courage to speak even the simplest truth. You've done well." The gardener's shoulders relaxed, the tension in his posture easing. Miss Marple had a way of conveying gratitude for honesty that inspired confidence rather than fear, a skill honed over years of observing human nature in its many guises. She glanced toward the garden, where the ivy clung to the old stone walls, thick and unyielding. "The roots of truth," she remarked softly, "like ivy, cling tight to old stone. They grow slowly, invisibly, until the time comes when they are seen clearly. You have helped reveal one of those roots tonight." The gardener nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. He had witnessed something small, almost insignificant, yet it had grown into a vital piece of the story unfolding within Maple Manor. Miss Marple turned back to the house, noting the soft light spilling from the windows and the shadows along the path. The confession, while quietly given, had shifted the atmosphere. The manor seemed to breathe with a sense of anticipation. In the silence that followed, she reflected that often it was the most observant among the ordinary, gardeners, maids, and quiet neighbours, who held the key to understanding hidden truths, their lives intertwined with the land and the household in ways that revealed more than the loudest voices ever could. With a polite nod, Miss Marple left Mr. Hobson by the shed, grateful for his honesty. The night continued, calm, yet alive with promise, the gentle tension of secrets ready to emerge, guiding her steps back toward the manor. Outside, the ivy swayed in the cool breeze, whispering of truths buried carefully and waiting patiently for discovery. Chapter 6. The Name Beneath the Ivy. The early morning mist clung to the manor garden as Miss Marple and Colonel Melchett approached the far wall, where ivy crept thickly over old stones and moss softened the edges of carefully tended flower beds. The air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of earth and dew-laden leaves, guided by the cryptic note discovered in the pumpkin days earlier. "The truth lies buried where the ivy grows." They moved slowly, their footsteps softened by the grass beneath. Each rustle of the leaves seemed amplified in the quiet, as though the garden itself held its breath in anticipation. Miss Marple's eyes swept along the wall, noting every gap in the dense ivy, every shadow that hinted at hollow spaces beneath the greenery. The Colonel, tall and formal in his long coat, paused beside her, tipping his hat in acknowledgment of the careful method. "I dare say, Miss Marple, whatever lies here, it has waited a long time to be discovered," he murmured. Miss Marple offered a faint smile, her eyes never leaving a subtle indentation in the ivy that suggested disturbance. With gentle persistence, they began to part the ivy carefully, revealing a small, moss-covered stone beneath. The shape was modest, unobtrusive, almost hidden entirely from casual view. Miss Marple knelt, brushing away leaves and soil, revealing a simple inscription, the initials E.W. carved delicately but unmistakably into the stone. Her heart, though calm, beat a little faster. The initials alone held weight, a direct connection to the mysterious Mrs. Whitby. Colonel Melchett glanced at her, eyes narrowing with curiosity.
"Eleanor Whitby?"
he asked softly, though his tone carried disbelief. Miss Marple nodded gently, examining the stone more closely. Beneath the initials, faint letters formed a short, haunting epitaph, "Beloved but not forgotten." The words were tender, yet their implication was unsettling, a reminder that the past often intertwines with the present in ways both delicate and profound. At that moment, Mrs. Whitby appeared, having been drawn by the disturbance in the garden. Her steps faltered when she glimpsed the gravestone, and she gasped sharply. Her face drained of colour, and before anyone could reach her, she sank to the ground, fainting gracefully onto the dew-kissed grass. Miss Marple and Colonel Melchett moved swiftly, helping her with quiet care. The tension of the moment softened, yet a layer of intrigue remained. Mrs. Whitby, alive and well, now confronted a monument to a past she had thought safely hidden. As they gently eased her into a sitting position, Miss Marple observed the interplay between the inscription and Mrs. Whitby's reaction. Some graves hold memories, others hold lies, she thought, and this one seemed to embody both. The ivy, dense and protective, had concealed not only the stone, but the delicate truths it represented, truths that carried power far beyond their modest size. Even in faintness, Mrs. Whitby's expression revealed the weight of old secrets pressing unexpectedly into the present. Colonel Melchett, brushing moss from his coat sleeve, remarked in hushed tones, "I cannot imagine who would erect such a stone." Miss Marple's gaze remained on the inscription, thoughtful and deliberate. Whoever had placed it here had intended both secrecy and visibility, a message to be found only by those who observed carefully and followed subtle clues. The careful concealment beneath ivy suggested knowledge of the manor, knowledge that could only have come from someone with intimate familiarity, someone who understood how the past could be hidden in plain sight. The morning air seemed to hum softly around them, carrying the scent of damp leaves and the faint echo of the manor's history. The stone, the initials, and the tender inscription hinted at truths yet to unfold. Miss Marple, steady and patient as always, let the moment settle in silence, knowing that beneath the calm surface of Maple Manor, secrets were slowly emerging, revealing a story that connected past to present in ways both delicate and inescapable. Miss Marple sat quietly in the garden, the ivy-clad walls whispering secrets of years long past. Colonel Melchett lingered nearby, curious yet cautious, sensing the calm deliberation in her gaze. She turned the events over in her mind, the cryptic note, the hidden gravestone, the photograph, and the stranger who had appeared so suddenly at the Halloween fête. Each piece of the puzzle had seemed disjointed, but now a pattern emerged, delicate yet undeniable. "You see, Colonel," Miss Marple began gently, her voice calm and deliberate, "the stranger is no intruder. He is intimately connected to Mrs. Whitby's past, more intimately than anyone else present might guess." The Colonel leaned closer, sensing the weight of her words. "Many years ago a scandal touched this family."
A scandal so delicate that it required extreme measures. She allowed a brief pause,
letting the soft rustle of leaves punctuate her statement. "The gravestone," she continued, "was never meant to mark a death in the literal sense. It commemorated a disappearance, carefully staged to allow Mr. Whitby to vanish from public view. He faked his death after a misstep, an incident the village never understood fully. And the stranger you saw at the masked ball?" She smiled faintly, a gentle twinkle in her eye. "That was him. He returned in secret, under the cover of Halloween, to retrieve something he had left hidden long ago, something he could not allow to remain where others might find it." Colonel Melchett's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he did not interrupt, allowing her the space to continue. "Mrs. Whitby has carried the knowledge of his survival with quiet dignity, protecting her household and reputation alike. The letters, the hidden gravestone, the photographs, all are reminders of the past, carefully placed, waiting for the right moment to surface." Miss Marple's gaze softened, reflecting understanding and empathy. "But there is another element here," she added, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the Colonel closer in quiet intrigue. "Someone else has observed these movements, someone who knows more than we yet understand. That person seeks to prevent Mr. Whitby from fully reclaiming what was once his. The stakes are personal, emotional, and potentially dangerous."
"Love never dies."
"But sometimes it kills." The words lingered, soft yet charged with meaning, as the autumn breeze stirred the ivy above them. Mrs. Whitby, still seated nearby after the fainting episode, now listened in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. There was fear, certainly, but also relief. The truth, though complicated and long buried, finally had a champion in Miss Marple, someone who could untangle the knots of years without judgment, only careful observation and understanding. Miss Marple allowed a moment of quiet reflection, gazing at the ivy climbing the old stones. The garden, serene and fragrant with dew and fallen leaves, seemed to breathe with the secrets it had held for decades. Each shadow and curve of the climbing greenery now felt alive with meaning, a reminder that history often lingers just out of sight, waiting for the patient and perceptive to uncover it. "Tonight," Miss Marple said softly, rising and brushing her hands on her skirts, "we must pay close attention. Mr. Whitby's return is not an ordinary visit. Something valuable has been hidden and someone else knows it. We must observe, deduce, and act carefully, or these long-held secrets may come to harm." Colonel Melchett nodded, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. Miss Marple's quiet wisdom, as always, cut through the layers of anxiety, illuminating the heart of the mystery with the clarity of patience and insight. The autumn light faded gently into evening, and the manor seemed to settle into an anticipatory hush, the stage set for revelations still to come. Chapter 7. The Final Trick. The drawing room of Maple Manor was dimly lit that evening, lanterns casting a soft, flickering glow over the pumpkin decorations and velvet drapes. Miss Marple had suggested a small Halloween séance, framed as playful entertainment, though in truth it was a carefully laid trap. The guests gathered, masks in place, their laughter a little nervous, their eyes flicking toward one another with the curiosity that accompanies anticipation. Every detail had been arranged to encourage observation, and every movement would be telling. Miss Marple seated herself at the head of the table, calm and composed, while the Colonel sat opposite, his posture alert but relaxed. Candles were arranged in a careful semicircle, the soft wax reflecting off the polished surface of the table. She spoke softly, inviting each guest to close their eyes and listen to the imagined whispers of spirits. The air hummed with suspense, and yet the warmth of the room kept tension from tipping into fear. The combination of comfort and expectation created the perfect atmosphere for revelation. As the séance proceeded, Miss Marple guided the conversation with gentle prompts, asking questions that seemed innocuous but were in fact carefully chosen to elicit slips of the tongue. Names were mentioned in passing, phrases repeated with slight alteration, and all the while she observed with the patience of someone accustomed to reading human nature like a map. Her eyes, sharp behind the calm exterior, caught the faintest tremor in posture, the briefest hesitation before a smile, and the subtle tightening of a jaw. It was during one such moment, as she asked about the origin of a particular family heirloom, that the trap worked. A phrase intended to sound casual caused a visible reaction. Mrs. Whitby's cousin, seated near the far end of the table, flinched ever so slightly and muttered under his breath, almost unnoticed. The words were incomplete, trailing off in confusion, but enough escaped to betray a familiarity with secrets that should have remained hidden. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "The hardest trick to pull off," she murmured, almost to herself, "is an honest face. Yet the truth cannot hide forever, and even the most practiced mask falters under careful observation." The cousin's panic, slight but undeniable, revealed more than 100 careful words could conceal. He had been blackmailing Mrs. Whitby over her husband's past, exploiting secrets he hoped would never be uncovered. The arrival of Mr. Whitby, the hidden letters, and the carefully orchestrated séance had created pressure too subtle to notice at first, but irresistible in its effect. Miss Marple allowed a moment of gentle silence, letting the realization settle over the room. The cousin's mask, both literal and figurative, slipped. Guests began to murmur softly, sensing that the playful séance had revealed more than expected. The tension, though still polite and controlled, was palpable. Observers could almost taste the mixture of relief and anxiety, the delicate dance between truth and secrecy finally tipping toward revelation. She leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "It seems that some truths, when pressed gently, will emerge even from the most careful concealment." The cousin, realizing the trap had succeeded, paled and lowered his gaze. Mrs. Whitby, though still startled, allowed herself a small sigh of relief. The weight of years of quiet fear began to lift, replaced by the calm assurance that honesty, when guided wisely, could dissolve even the most persistent shadows. By the end of the evening, the séance had served its purpose. Secrets were uncovered without scandal, the air cleared of unspoken threats, and the manor returned to its cozy rhythm, warm with candlelight and the soft murmurs of a village that had glimpsed the truth without harm. Miss Marple's quiet authority, her patience and observation, had guided the revelation with precision, leaving the guests both satisfied and reflective. The drawing-room settled into a hush as Miss Marple lifted her hand slightly, signalling the attention of the assembled guests. The soft glow of the lanterns and the flicker of candlelight cast gentle shadows across their faces, lending the perfect calm for reflection. The playful suspense of the Halloween séance had reached its apex, and now it was time for clarity, for the quiet unveiling of truth. In every mystery, there comes a moment when the candles burn clear, and tonight that moment had arrived. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, resting briefly on each face before turning to Mrs. Whitby and Colonel Melchett. "This evening has shown us that even the smallest detail carries weight," she began softly, her voice warm yet precise. The missing brooch, which seemed at first a mere prank, was in fact the first signal that someone sought to manipulate fear. The note hidden in the pumpkin guided our attention, hinting at secrets deliberately concealed beneath ivy and memory. Each footprint, each subtle scent, each hesitation we observed, all of these led us to the same person, the one whose intentions were both personal and desperate. Her gaze lingered on Mrs. Whitby's cousin, who sat rigidly in his chair, realizing that the gentle calm of the room now illuminated his misdeeds. Miss Marple continued, her tone unhurried, as if weaving a story rather than delivering judgment. The missing husband, presumed dead for many years, returned in secret, hoping to reclaim what was his without drawing attention. He meant no harm to the household, only to resolve the past quietly. Yet the cousin, aware of secrets that had remained hidden for decades, sought to exploit the situation. His panic, evident during our séance, revealed the dangerous pressure he had placed upon events that should have remained peaceful. The room remained still, every listener caught in the quiet power of her words. "The confrontation that ensued," Miss Marple continued, "was unfortunate, but it arose from desperation rather than malice. The visitor's despair, the cousin's greed, all converged in a moment where action could not be avoided. But justice need not be cruel to be effective. Every thread has been observed, every detail accounted for, and those responsible will answer for their choices gently but surely." She paused, letting the explanation sink into the soft candlelight, the flickering shadows dancing across the walls. The manor seemed to exhale, as if it too recognized the resolution settling into place. "Maple Manor has weathered many stories, many secrets," she said, her voice calm and comforting. "And tonight it has reminded us that even in mystery, clarity comes with patience.
Every clue, every hesitation, every overlooked detail,
all converge to illuminate the truth." Guests shifted subtly, the tension easing into relief and understanding. Mrs. Whitby's hands, previously clenched in worry, relaxed as she listened, reassured by Miss Marple's careful explanation. Colonel Melchett nodded silently, appreciating both the intellectual clarity and the emotional care with which the situation had been handled. The warmth of the room, the soft amber glow of the candles, and the gentle cadence of Miss Marple's reasoning transformed what could have been fear into reflection and satisfaction. As the candlelight flickered across the gathered faces, Miss Marple concluded with a quiet, gentle smile. "Secrets like shadows may linger, but with patience, observation, and care, they reveal themselves. And when they do, justice and understanding follow, leaving the heart of the home at peace once more." The guests murmured their agreement, comforted by the harmony of revelation and the quiet dignity with which the truth had been delivered. In that soft glow, Maple Manor felt whole again. The mystery had been unravelled, the past acknowledged, and the present restored to calm. Each person left with the satisfaction of witnessing a careful mind at work, a gentle justice enacted, and a reminder that even the darkest secrets, when revealed thoughtfully, can lead to light. Chapter 8. Dawn over St. Mary Mead. The first rays of morning filtered gently through the windows of Maple Manor, soft light spilling across the polished floors and the remnants of last night's decorations. The air smelled faintly of autumn leaves and warm tea, a comforting contrast to the tension that had filled the house only hours before. Outside, the village stirred to life, the distant crow of a rooster and the gentle hum of early activity reminding everyone that the world moved steadily on, no matter the secrets uncovered within the manor's walls. Miss Marple moved quietly to the small side table in the drawing-room. where a silver teapot gleamed in the morning light. She poured steaming tea into delicate cups, the faint aroma of bergamot curling in the air. Colonel Melchett lingered nearby, tidying up papers and notes, his usual composed demeanour softened by the events of the previous night. He had been awake far later than usual, and the fatigue in his eyes was unmistakable. "You see, Miss Marple," he began hesitantly as he accepted the cup she offered,
"I do not believe I could have discovered the truth on my own.
"There were too many small details, too many subtle threads I would never have noticed." He took a sip, savouring the warmth, while the steam blurred the sharp lines of worry from his face. Miss Marple smiled, modest and calm. "Murder," she said gently, "is rarely about grand schemes or sweeping motives. It is more often about little feelings that grow too wild, unchecked. Jealousy, fear, impatience, they accumulate quietly, and eventually even the smallest ember can set a flame. That is what we observed here last night." She paused, letting the words settle like gentle incense in the quiet room. Colonel Melchett nodded thoughtfully, stirring his tea slowly. "And yet," he murmured, "you see everything so clearly, Miss Marple. The footprints, the glove, the hidden letters. You pieced them together while the rest of us were blind to what was under our noses." Miss Marple only shook her head, pouring another cup of tea for herself. "It is not vision alone, Colonel," she replied softly. "It is patience, attention, and a willingness to observe people as they truly are, rather than as we wish to see them. Even evil," she added with a faint, wry smile, "can wear its slippers by the hearth, appearing gentle and ordinary, while hiding intentions that might surprise the unobservant." Her words carried warmth, humour, and a gentle lesson for anyone willing to listen. The inspector chuckled quietly, a sound both relieved and humbled. "I suppose that is why you are Miss Marple and I am simply an inspector," he said, tilting his head. There was no envy in his voice, only admiration and the comfortable acknowledgement of expertise. The manner, in that moment, seemed to breathe a little easier, as if sharing in the satisfaction of a mystery resolved without drama or unnecessary grief. Outside, the garden glistened with dew, sunlight catching on the leaves and the remnants of ivy climbing the walls. Inside, the scent of tea mingled with the soft warmth of the morning, carrying the promise of calm after tension. Miss Marple sipped her tea, eyes following the subtle movements of the house as it awakened, and felt the satisfaction that came from watching order restored and hearts eased. The conversation drifted to lighter matters, the aroma of autumn, the villagers' plans for the day, and gentle anecdotes from past fêtes. The calmness of the morning, coupled with the reflective depth of understanding, created a perfect balance, a gentle conclusion to a tale of secrets, revelations, and the small but powerful ways human nature can twist and turn. In that peaceful glow, Maple Manor and its inhabitants began anew, comforted by the warmth of tea, the clarity of truth, and the quiet knowledge that even the smallest observer could untangle the knotted threads of a complex mystery. The morning sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, scattering gentle light across cobblestone streets and the thatched roofs of cottages. Autumn leaves, painted in shades of amber, gold, and rust, drifted lazily to the ground, carpeting the village in seasonal warmth. Villagers moved quietly through the streets, sweeping away remnants of the Halloween fête, carrying pumpkins, lanterns, and the occasional costume with care. There was laughter in the air, soft and unhurried, as neighbours exchanged greetings and commented on the previous night's excitement. Back at Maple Manor, Miss Marple tended her small garden, her hands brushing over damp soil and the last of the fallen leaves. The rhythm of planting and pruning brought a soothing normalcy, a gentle contrast to the tension of recent events. Her mind, usually alert to the subtleties of human behaviour, was unusually still, enjoying the simple pleasure of the earth beneath her fingers and the crisp scent of morning air. The ivy along the walls glimmered with dew, quiet witnesses to the mysteries that had unfolded within the manor. She paused, straightening slightly, and observed the patterns in the garden paths, where the frost had melted more quickly, where the soil remained soft, and where the scattered leaves caught the morning light. Even in the calm, she reflected on the curious nature of human hearts. Secrets like seeds often lie dormant until the right conditions awaken them, and much like the leaves that returned each year, mysteries seem to return, renewed by the passage of time and the quiet persistence of those willing to notice. In the village square, children skipped past with small baskets, gathering stray leaves and chattering about ghosts and goblins they had glimpsed in their imaginations the night before. Shopkeepers arranged fresh wares on windowsills, smiling at the occasional playful squeal from a passing child in costume. The day moved slowly but with purpose, like a careful narrative unfolding without the rush of urgency. It was a rhythm that suited Miss Marple perfectly, a world where observation and reflection coexisted with ordinary life. She straightened her hat and dusted her hands, surveying the manor's grounds with satisfaction. Maple Manor, once again calm, stood proud amid the gold and amber landscape. The traces of the fête were gone, replaced by the subtle beauty of autumn, a soft breeze teasing the ivy, the scent of turned earth, and the quiet hum of village life resuming. Miss Marple allowed herself a small, contented smile. Peace had returned, and yet the curiosity that had guided her through the tangled threads of recent events remained quietly alive, ready for the next puzzle to appear. A small robin hopped along the garden wall, pausing to survey the world with bright eyes before flitting to a nearby branch. Miss Marple watched it for a moment, appreciating the simplicity of life continuing, uninterrupted and harmonious. She thought of the villagers, the stranger who had arrived and departed, and the delicate truths that had been revealed. The resolution of one story, she reflected, was merely the prelude to the next. Mysteries, like autumn leaves, always return, drifting in unexpectedly and inviting attention once more. The wind stirred gently, carrying with it the faint echo of laughter, the scent of pumpkin and candle wax, and the promise of quiet adventures yet to come. Miss Marple returned to her bench, seated herself with hands folded calmly in her lap, and allowed the serenity of the morning to fill her.
Peace returned, but curiosity never sleeps.
The village, the manor, and its inhabitants continued their day with soft energy, secure in the knowledge that secrets, discoveries, and gentle surprises were never far away, always ready to renew the rhythm of life in St. Mary Mead. And so, dear listener, as the hearth warms your evening and the village rests in quiet, think for a moment. If you had been at Maple Manor that Halloween night, what might you have seen? What whispers might you have heard? What secrets might have brushed past you in the shadows? The night has ended, but the curiosity it sparks lives on.